Nick Grantham on the podcast. How are you, mate?
I'm very good, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. How has your summer been?
It's been an interesting summer. So some time with the family, which is always nice, and a new role at the end of August. So back into full-time employment, which is a change of pace, but a welcome change of pace for us.
New role, so full-time employment. So I was going
Yeah.
to talk to you about consultancy and why you've gone into that and a
Well, you
career,
still
and then
can.
now you're moving back into full-time employment and national insurance numbers.
But there's always a side hustle, though, Steve. There's always a side hustle. So still consultant, but just a consultant with a full-time job as well.
So, Nick, we've probably struck this sort of kindred spirit for decades, probably as much as anything, but certainly recently around this idea about professional effectiveness. So I'm really keen to get to that because we can just then go, yeah, and I agree all the way through. But
Yeah.
it'd be really useful for people tuning in to hear a bit about your career, the step in from that institute type system into consultancy, and I'd love to ask you about how you create success in that type of role.
Yeah.
And then on to maybe your book, You're Hired, and the consultant, and sorry, the employability and the professional effectiveness that you're so passionate about as I am. But it'd be really good if you could just give us a bit of a background to you and where you've sort of come from. Where have you originated from?
So down south originally, now misplaced up in the northeast. A place I said I'd never live, but actually I can't see myself moving from here now. It's a great place, Newcastle. But yeah, youngest of three. So two older brothers. The middle one way more talented athletically than me, so I was just a bit of a trier. Not academically probably the smartest tool in the box, and I talk about that in the book about how the entry exams to comprehensive kind of passed me by, and then I found myself in what was lovingly known in those days as the remedials. I'm not sure you can call it remedials now, probably special measures or something like that. And just sort of in that class in first year comprehensive, thinking, I'm not sure I should be here really. I'm probably a little bit smarter. So just started working hard and moved up the sort of groups. Left school at 16 because that's kind of what everyone in my family did, and got safe jobs. So I went and worked for Barclays Bank and then Royal Sun Alliance Insurance, and I was horrific at both jobs. I got a D in maths, so why I thought working in a bank would be a good idea. But it was good because it was like sixth form, but you got paid. So I had a good 2 years at Barclays and then 4 fairly miserable years at Sun Alliance. I just wasn't good at people's pensions and it wasn't for me. And that was really when I'd started competing in Taekwondo, and I'd met teammates that were going to university and doing sports science, and I didn't even know you could go to university and do sports science. I thought you just went and did like astrophysics and English literature. So this kind of world opened up to me, so I went back to night school, studied for an A-level, got accepted to Chester, where I went and studied, and I think it was beneficial going in as a mature student because I knew what it was like on the outside, and I didn't really want to sit in a 1 metre by 1 metre cubicle for the next 40 years. I wanted to wear shorts and a t-shirt and go to some cool places and work with some exciting athletes. So I worked hard when I was at university and sort of squeezed every last drop, and it wasn't probably the most esteemed learning establishment in the country, but similar to, we might get onto this with careers, people are always looking to go somewhere else and do something better and be at a better place. Just like make the most out of what you've got where you are now, make that the best place. And that's what I did with Chester, and it afforded me some really good opportunities. I'll be forever grateful to Dave Kellett, who was one of my tutors, sort of introduced me to Claire Feasy and Lynn Booth, who ran the Northwest Sports Science Support Project. I pestered the hell out of them to get me onto that project, which I then did, and that was my first taste of providing sports science support and fitness testing young tennis players. They introduced me to Dave Collins, who kind of gave me that confidence of just admitting that I didn't know someone's sport when I stood in for him in judo. I remember phoning them up and talking to him, and he said, just tell him you don't know judo, Nick. Tell him you know sports science, but ask them for advice. And he was really humble and gave me a lot of his time. And then from the university, this is kind of where our paths probably met unknowingly. I think we applied for 2 positions, one at the British Olympic Medical Centre and one at Lilleshall Sports Injury and Human Performance Centre. You were interviewed for both. I didn't make the interview for the BOMC. I only got the one call in. But you got the job at the BOMC and I got the job at Lilleshall.
Yeah.
And I think on reflection, probably those were the right decisions. I'm not sure I would have thrived quite as much down in London with the rowers and the endurance community. But I guess that's where we kind of first met, because there was no real sort of sports science network really outside of universities at that time. You had
there's no one there. It's 10 full-time sports scientists in the country then.
It's crazy. So there's kind of you guys down at the BOMC. There was Andy Harrison and his team over at Welsh Institute of Sport, and us as a private organisation at Lilleshall. And I think we were quite forward-thinking to go, actually, why don't we go down and spend a day with you in London, and why don't we go across and spend a day in Wales? And we all sort of met each other and swapped stories and built that initial network, I think.
Yeah, what was that called? Applied Sports Science Development Group. We tried to give it a really snappy acronym, but it didn't work. But that was a nice little congregation of some like-minded people who, I think I remember having the conversation in the canteen at a conference, just saying we should just get together and just shoot the breeze because we're so different from everyone else here. And that was a nice little exercise of us driving a network ourselves.
Yeah.
Almost a little bit like we're the only ones, which got exciting actually. But it was probably has been lost a little bit, where a lot of people say now, where's the provision? Where's that sort of, who's providing that for us? Where are the CPD opportunities that I need to go to for free?
We drove it ourselves, I think.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, it was all on our time, really.
Because I know, like you say, trying to find that sense of belonging, I know going to my first basis conference, I just felt like a complete outsider because everyone was very academic and spoke in these sort of different language to me. And I was like, oh my God. And again, I saw Dave Collins speak, and I was like, he actually kind of speaks a bit like me, far cleverer. But like, well, if he can come from the military and do these sorts of things, well, maybe there's hope for me. And I think you're right. Us travelling to the Wales and coming to see you guys was that first opportunity of like-minded people delivering outside of academia.
Yeah, so let me just ask you about those sort of early years then, because I this is probably a little bit like, oh, boy done good, but I've got the same sort of background of failing at school and coming out with pretty much nothing, but then trying again, which then I felt so far behind everyone else that it just gave me huge drive to catch up.
Yeah.
And found quite sticky ways to learn as I went. Like I would, when I was learning about anatomy, I'd go and hammer the hamstrings. And so I would remember that. Or we'd learn about maximum heart rate or breathlessness, and I'd go and do hill runs, and it would stick. So it sounded a bit like with one A level to your name, just thinking I've got to get there through tenacity, as opposed to that I'm ahead of the curve all the way through my career. I'm a high achiever, A grade student, first class, everything.
Yeah.
Which, to me, that sounds like the process that you've gone through is as valuable as the certificates, if not more.
Well, I think you can probably draw comparisons to sport and academies where, should you specialise early? Should you have generalised training first? And sometimes the people that excel when they're young then drop out of sport. And I think that's probably similar in any profession. There were undoubtedly people that were smarter than me at university, but maybe it was a little bit too easy and they didn't push as hard and didn't see the opportunities. I remember in my master's group, our Dave Kellett said, we've got request from a guy called Kieran. He's going to run the Marathon des Sables. We're going to put together a sports science support group. It's going to be voluntary, in your own time, travelling to Crewe and Alsager to use the climate change, all these things. In a class of 30 people, I think 3 or 4 of us actually went, yeah, we'll do that. And I probably wasn't the best physiologist there, but that I saw that as a chance to work with a real live human being that's going to do something crazy, and I can see if I can make him better and put this stuff into practice. So I think it's those recognising the opportunities and just saying, yeah, I'll have a go at that, and then figure out how you do it once you get going.
Yeah, you don't hear that much about people that sat down and those opportunities and said no.
No.
Or they just left their hand unraised. You don't hear that about those people. And I remember the same sort at university, but continually say, oh, it's not fair, or how do I get this, how do I get that? But they're not prepared to do the graft or the voluntary hours in addition to. And that doesn't seem to me to be something you hear about, but it's ultimately a determinant of your later career.
Yeah, I remember Claire Feasy and Lynn Booth coming in, again, talking about the Northwest Sports Science Support Project in our 3rd year. And I was the only person in that year group that kept going down to the phone box before mobile phones, and every week leaving a voicemail for Claire. Hello, it's me again. I'd still like to come on the project. And after about 2 or 3 months, got a call back, and you're in. And why wouldn't 30 people put their hands up for that?
So you were a pest. Let's get that. Let's get that
I was
straight.
a pest.
What? Why were you a pest?
Because I didn't want to go back and work for an insurance company for 40 years and tow a caravan, and that'd be my weekend.
Right. I'm not sure.
Not that there's anything wrong with caravans. No, it's just the guy that I shared a cubicle with was big into his caravans and had a big sort of rockabilly quiff, and I saw myself turning into that person in 40 years' time.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, so you'd lived a life that you didn't want to live.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Right. That's fascinating. So that gives you context. It gives you that perspective. It gives you the drive to make it happen whilst you can make it happen, as opposed to going in blind to your educational experience and then kind of getting spat out the back and then not knowing what, and then probably defaulting to something that it's not an ambition, but it's actually, it will do.
Yeah. You're settling for something, I think, is what most of my colleagues went and worked at call centres or became medical reps, which is fine, but that's not what I set out to do on sports science degree for. Yeah.
Okay, so we crossed paths around that sort of late 90s, and you keep reminding me every time I speak to you about you going for the BOMC job. Yeah. And like you say, I think you're probably in the right place. I was probably stacked for that job anyway, in terms of probably being more of a physiologist.
Yeah.
I'd worked 2 years with a rowing team. I'd been down there. I'd trained up on the protocols. I changed my flight at £150 to make the interviews. The first thing they did was thank me. And I was like, right, I'm on the front foot here.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure how you would have got on with the rowers. You would have given them a dose of too much reality with that accent.
I just think, on reflecting, we both got the right jobs for the right person. So it comes down to the recruiters. Obviously knew, they did a good job of looking for the right person. So academically, we might have stacked up very similarly, but like you say, your experiences probably stacked you for that job. And me going to Lillyshaw with John Brewer, the experience that I'd had with the Marathon des Sables and working in team sports worked better for that environment.
Yeah. So where did you went from, you were at Lillyshaw, and then you started working with a number of different teams, netball, gymnastics, is that right?
Yeah, in England netball, so I went to. So when I was at Lillyshaw, I was with gymnastics, and then John Brewer said I was committing career suicide to leave and go and work with England netball as a strength and conditioning coach. So that was 2 adverts, one for England rugby, one for England netball. And I think they were the first 2 formal S&C positions that were advertised. And at the time, sports science and physiology was king, I think. And John, obviously being a physiologist, just said, "What are you doing?" No one even knows what strength and conditioning is. But I just kind of had a hunch and some insight from overseas that this was an element of performance that was going to grow, and it was the element that probably interested me more. So I'd done the whole sort of fitness testing every sort of 6 weeks, and I really wanted to know what happened in the middle, and I had a taste of that with the gymnasts, helping them improve. So yeah, took the leap of faith and went and worked with netball, and what a great sport. I loved it.
They've had a resurgence, haven't they? Maybe it's just kicking in from all your early work.
I'd like to think there's a legacy that was put in place.
You just laid the foundations.
Well, you know, I coach the coach now. So, well, actually, both of them. Jess has just taken over from Tracy. So, yeah, I'd like to think there's a seed there somewhere, a legacy.
You laid the foundation. Yeah, you're claiming that one. That's good.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
nice, deep retrospective work. That is. And then where from that?
So that was to the English Institute of Sport. I would have stayed at netball. I loved working at netball. I had the best coach, Lynn Gunson, best performance director I've ever worked with, Waimarana Turmana, and it was just amazing to work with those coaches. And it was a great sport, but the English Institute of Sport was starting to be put in place, and with netball, I either decided to become the netball expert, of which there's probably 5 countries to work in, and I was already working in probably one of the more well-paid ones, and I didn't really want to go and live in New Zealand or Australia. Or you had this thing, the English Institute of Sport, and actually, to be fair, the performance director said, you should go for the English Institute of Sport in terms of your long-term career development. You know, yes, you could thrive in netball, but there's going to be so many opportunities to work with multiple sports. So she was like one of my favourite bosses ever. So
tell us about her.
So, well, why is she was just? I mean, she was formidable. She would scare the pants off of me if I got called to a meeting. I'd never done anything wrong, but it was almost like you felt that you were in for a bollocking.
What was her name?
Don't make me pronounce the whole name, Steve.
Go on.
It's really hard. I just call her Y. But you have to look up, Y, WAI. You have to look up the rest of it because it's complicated.
Okay.
But
is that New Zealand origin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So she was fantastic, and things like her saying, you know, on my CPD, I wanted to do more and more strength and conditioning courses. And she said, you don't need to do a strength course. I want you to do a business course. So I had to do a Open University certificate in management, and she was absolutely right. I didn't need more X's and O's. I needed to know how to manage people and deal with, you know, long-term strategic plannings. But at that time, all of my colleagues were just doing more and more technical stuff. And just their knowledge of that sport and other high-performance sports was amazing. Same with Lynn Gunson, who was the coach. She just massively underestimated as coaches in this country.
So that early breadth, that investment into almost the non-technical, how do you deliver your work? Not necessarily what you're going to deliver, not necessarily the craft skills that, you know, that we've got that common interest in, but almost the mechanics of how you work as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, strength and conditioning coaches know how to write annual plans, but just looking at strategic goals of an organisation, or, you know, over 3, 4, 5 years, what is it that you want to actually achieve? Budgets, managing human resources. It was actually useful just being the one person in sport sat around a table with other people from a diverse range of industries and professions doing this management certificate. It was on reflection, it was really good, a really good opportunity to take.
Do you find that useful now in a kind of consulting role?
Yeah, I've still got the course materials at home in the bookcase, and there's still definitely elements that you refer back to time and time again. You know, and absolutely. Yeah,
that's interesting in the sense that I think when you're in that sort of network, especially when you get plugged into like an institute type system, the growth and the learning from networking with people is just huge. And I think I probably underestimated just how much growth there was running your own business effectively.
Yeah.
Where there's so much to life that you're not thinking about when you're plugged in as an employee. But equally, that's one of the key dynamics, that you haven't necessarily got the team, but you've got that massive growth and learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that too?
Yeah, I think like being a consultant for 12 years is you have to pick up a lot of skill sets very quickly. Being able to balance different workloads, being able to manage. So every contract that you work with, they'll think that they'll obviously want you to be their priority, but actually having to manage those priorities and looking at income sources and not being underexposed in one area and over in another. There's lots of skills. I think we talk about having a side hustle, and that came up last year on social media about should we have secondary jobs. And again, a lot of the books that I started reading around self-development sort of 10, 15 years ago, things like Never Eat Alone, The Millionaire Next Door, all of the E-Myth is another great book. All these books were, it's okay to have your day job, but you need something else on the side to give you some additional skills, but also to give you some security when that inevitable day happens. Because we're not in a profession, or I don't think there are any professions now that are 40 years man and boy, same company. It's a different era. So I think we have to be prepared for that.
Yeah, it's definitely coming.
Yeah,
much more concertedly over the next 5 or 10 years. But it's a strange one, isn't it? Because you feel like if you move on from a place, there's a sort of a disloyalty. But ultimately, a company has no loyalty. You might have the people having loyalty, but a company doesn't have a loyalty to a person. And so you've ultimately got loyalty to your family and feeding them and housing them, haven't you, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That's the sort of thing that professional football players or professional sports people get absolutely hammered for when they say, oh, I'm playing for my family, or we should be playing for the club or for our nation. Well, yes, to a degree, but you've got to look after your family and not being selfish. You've got to look after yourself and do what's right for you. And yeah, I remember, I think when I left netball, I thought they'd be devastated and the whole netball system would fall apart because they didn't have me as an S&C coach. And I think within a week I was getting texts going, this new guy's great. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Nick who?
You said you're interested in development. You should have a chat to him.
Yeah. So you quickly realise that, everybody is expendable, and life does move on, and players and athletes and teams will find replacements that can do the job as well, if not better than when you were there. So yeah, no, it's an interesting concept of sort of loyalty.
So why did you leave the EIS? I don't know whether I've had this conversation with you. So we were both in. When did you leave?
2007, I left.
God, that was really early. So
physically,
yeah. So yeah.
I probably departed mentally a little bit earlier than that.
I'm interested because we can do a bit of a comparison here, because I kind of left my dream job in some ways.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know, certainly as it was growing, we'd just been awarded the Home Olympics. It's still growing, and you kind of stepped off the bus. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. I wonder why. And I'm curious to find out what the motivations were for that and what was the drivers to go in independent.
I was miserable.
Oh, okay.
No, so I loved the English Institute when I started. It was brilliant because like 9 regional leads, S&C came together. Everyone was sort of young and real young thrusters and like super keen to develop the organisation. And it was like for 2 or 3 years, it was just a real melting pot of ideas. And I think as the organisation grew, it probably wasn't able to keep up with the ambitions of and probably the diverse range of ambitions of those S&C coaches. So I think there was a period where if you wanted to progress financially or professionally, you kind of started to move away from the gym floor and behind a desk and becoming more of the strategy and the sort of the paperwork aspect of it. And at that point, I still feel now, I've got a lot of coaching in me, and I love the coaching and I love the interaction and the day-to-day delivery. And I really didn't want to sit behind a desk in an office away from the gym, but that was the only route that was available to me at that time. And we explored maybe taking sabbaticals, maybe becoming a specialist in a particular type of sport, combat sports, which is interesting to see how some of those roles have now evolved with their heads of performance. But at the time, it was you're either on the floor coaching or you need to go into management. And I guess I hit a bit of a ceiling and became increasingly sort of disillusioned. And I remember my coaching, I just thought I started to stagnate with my coaching, and it could have very easily become a 9-to-5 job. Turn up, coach 20 athletes, go home, repeat. And I really didn't want that to happen. And I think it was ultimately making me miserable. And I remember speaking to Kate, who's my wife, on the drive home one night, and she said, just resign. And I'm like, well, I can't, because like you say, EIS is going one direction. It's like, again, career suicide that I'd committed before. And she was right. So I got home, wrote my resignation, handed it in, and yes, then started to shit myself massively because there wasn't really anything formal that I was going to go on to. I remember speaking to my boss, and he said, okay, so what job are you going to next? And I was like, I haven't got one. Which was unusual
for them.
yeah. And it was a bit unusual. But that then created that sense of urgency of, okay, well, now I need to provide. So what am I going to do?
That's an interesting concept, because that sense of action that comes from what next.
Yeah,
I've never felt anything quite like that from. Okay, I mean, you graft when you're working with the team, and you put in the hours, 18-hour days regularly to make it happen. Get up before the athletes, go to bed after the athletes, but I've never felt that sense of holy moly, what am I going to do next? And it's interesting when you talk about side hustles. Talking to a number of kind of colleagues where they've got this sort of independent business brewing couple of days a week, but they've got a nice cushy number working with a Premiership football club or whatever it might be, and that provides quite a lot of safety and stability. Not that you're going to get stability in Premiership football necessarily, but it doesn't create that drive and action in the side hustle. And finding that balance to be able to make it happen or hold yourself accountable to some deadlines, for example.
Yeah.
How did that first feel when you went out alone then?
When you got to pay your mortgage, you got to pay your mortgage. Like, they're not going to wait for you. They might wait for you for a month, maybe 2 months, but it's just you did. I think what it did for me very quickly was I think it talks about hubris and humility. So I definitely had some hubris when I was at the IS. I was working with the best athletes in the world. I must be amazing. And I was still quite a humble person, but there was definitely a bit of like, hey, I'm one of the best of the best. And then, and would look down my nose probably at other opportunities. Oh no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to work with general public. I'm not going to work in business. No. That's. I'm going to wait for the perfect job with the elite team to come out. When you've got to pay your mortgage, you will do what it takes to pay your mortgage. And actually, I think that forced me into some environments that I probably wouldn't have even considered, but actually gained a lot from working with general population, recreational athletes within a private facility.
What did it give you? What were those sort of nuggets? Because if you have kind of progress is the wrong word, kind of through the ranks of sort of junior and then senior and then international level athletes. But if you're then kind of going backwards, if you see what I mean, what does that give you?
The perception is you're going backwards, but you're not, and that's what a lot of graduates need to get. It like just because you're a first team and you've got a crest on your chest doesn't necessarily mean you're really optimizing performance necessarily and making a real significant impact. So working with general population, recreational triathletes, recreational cyclists, footballers, some of those were the most motivated individuals that I've ever worked with, because do you know what? They were paying me out of their money. They decided to come and train with me, and them completing an Ironman was a massive life achievement, as important as being stood on top of an Olympic podium. I've been very fortunate to work at both ends and had people, as you have, stand on top of Olympic podiums. I kid you not, some of those general population athletes worked as, if not harder, had more determination and balanced all the demands of work, life, and was super rewarding. And it just opened my eyes to actually there is life outside of elite sport. And it's only really the sort of the snobbery that is perpetuated within the profession that if you don't work in elite sport, you're not delivering performance, which is nonsense. You can work in healthcare, you can work in private settings and have a massive impact.
So you've hit upon there you're just finding excellence and human endeavour in all pockets of life. Is that what you're referring?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I will rank working with post-cardiac rehab patients and helping them recover some level of normality to their life, function, sense of self-esteem. I rank that right up there with any gold medals.
Yeah.
I also rank a lot of the cut and thrust of some of those people that didn't make it. You think about the winners, but then ultimately that leaves a mass of people that didn't win. And then the pursuit and the persistence that they demonstrated along the way, to me, I get goosebumps thinking about the ups and downs and the roller coaster that they've been through, as well as the fact that a head teacher grafting away on a day-to-day basis that's trying to look for a bit of an edge for their team, learn from high performance. They're just as inspiring as any elite athlete ever.
Absolutely. I think some of the loveliest messages that I've had and cards are from, like you say, the broken biscuits, the athletes that like left it all out there and didn't quite achieve, but actually they're quite happy because they tried everything they could and were the best that they could possibly be, but might have been 7th or 8th. That's not bad going, 7th or 8th in the world is pretty damn good. So yeah, absolutely.
So you've chucked your notice in and you've gone for it. You're crapping yourself and you are selling yourself however you can. Tell me about that selling bit. You're now kind of invoicing people, or you're putting your name out there, your word out there.
Yeah.
What's your take on how you balance kind of communicating what you do without it being too selly and trying to ram it down people's throat?
It's a really difficult tightrope to walk.
I'm just asking for a friend.
Yeah, just I think I probably had to get a little bit more confident. And so I was always very embarrassed about telling people how much I was going to charge and what my fees were. I was very embarrassed about talking about athletes I'd worked with. And then you talk to any marketer. I remember I used to work with people and I'd say, well, I've done a bit of this and a little bit of that. And then they look and go, bloody hell, this is a bit better than what you've just explained to me. You've done this and this and this. You need to tell people that information. So I think it is a challenge. I think you've probably got to have a portfolio to back it up. I think what you might see on social media now is people that have rubbed shoulders, walked past someone in a gym, and now they've trained them for 6 months, apparently. So I think you have to there's a difference between selling and lying. So, tell the truth, even if it might not sound quite as glamorous. But it is a difficult one to balance out. I'm probably not the best salesman. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about what.
No, but ultimately you've got to make a living, so you have to charge.
Yeah,
it's not all a free gig, and it's certainly a dynamic that we're constantly thinking about. We get more noisy, if that's the right term. We communicate more when we've got things that we're selling, literally.
Yeah.
But then when someone says, "Oh, I didn't know about that. I would love to have heard about it," then it makes you think, "I've got to do more of that." Obviously, on the backdrop of trying to add value to people's lives and provide good content and so on.
I think that's the key you touched on there. Is there's a balance between, okay, just accept that I will be selling a course or a conference or my consultancy fees, but what I'll also try and do is give information that is free to access or point you in the right direction of other content that I think is really valuable. So it's so that every fifth message is going to be probably a sales pitch, but I'm not one of these that does the big sales letters that you see in America, because you get these sales letters and it's like, okay, I'll basically just scroll down to the bottom and tell me the price. I'll just tell you I've got a course in 2 weeks' time. This is what it is, and then the next 5 posts may be actual free information. Here's a great podcast. Here's a great book to read. So I think it's striking that balance. It's when all you get is just hit over the head with sales letters one after the other.
Do you subscribe to Seth Godin's newsletter?
I don't subscribe to his newsletter. I've read pretty much all of his books.
Yeah. He'll send a blog every day, and what I really like about them is that they range between sort of 20 words to 200 words.
Yeah.
And it just lands in your email box, and pretty much all of them add value.
Yeah.
Not all of them make me go, "Oh yeah, I'll do that." And then maybe every 10, maybe every 20, it's maybe not that frequent actually. At the bottom of the blog is, "And on this, you can enroll on this course if you want, or sign up to our whatever training." And I sit there and I think, I would spend the money if I had it. It's absolutely fine for you to sell stuff because you added so much value to my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people don't. They just feel like a bit of noise about, look what I've done. I'm humbled to have been submitted to my abstract to this minor conference. It doesn't necessarily speak to adding value to someone else's lives.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I came up against was, obviously once you start selling what you're doing, is from your colleagues and your peer group. Oh, I can't believe he charges that much. That's outrageous. And then there's probably a little bit of jealousy attached to that. And I'm just like, I don't charge extortionate rates. It's like going hourly rates. And by the way, I have to pay my tax out of that, and my pension and my travel and all the things that you get as part of your full-time contract. So
have you had that specifically, or is that a noise and a voice in your head?
It's definitely gone on. Absolutely. I know that I've had, in the early days, people would ask me to do a conference presentation or run a workshop, and I'd give them my day fee, and but it's you, Nick. Well, yeah, but you still got to pay me for the knowledge. And I've found it's always been more difficult to sort of do courses for strength and conditioning coaches, because it's just Nick. Nick will do that for, a packet of biscuits and a cup of tea. Whereas other organisations see the value, and other allied professionals, so mainly sort of physiotherapy, rehab, that I've kind of made a bit of a niche for.
Yeah.
They see the added value and the expert from out of town, I guess. But yeah, there's probably a lot of it inside my head as well.
Yeah, well, that's that. Certainly, when I just started doing corporate speaking, some advice I had from one of my old lecturers and mentors, who does the same. He said that my guess is you're probably being held back by imagining that word will get back to your former family.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, it's like a mind reader. And it is that sense of just thinking, oh, I've got to kind of establish my new identity, but I'm still creating this hesitation based on something that's imagined in my head more than anything.
Yeah.
I've had people say I can't afford that. But equally, and the best bit of advice I was given about pricing was about you get to charge nothing or an awful lot. And people should have permission to pay you or offer you to pay you nothing or an awful lot.
Yeah.
And everything else in the middle is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Funny, eh?
Yeah, I knew I was way off the mark. One of the first speaking engagement I did for an NHS trust, and I was racking my brains. What should I charge for a day? And I'd come up with a figure, and I was like, "Oh, that's way too much. I'll have to take that down." And took it right down. I submitted it, and within about 30 seconds, I got, "Yeah, that's fine. We'll pay that." And I'm like, "Oh, damn! I've undercharged." So, yeah, you learn as you go on.
So tell us about. So you're 4 years into your own consultancy, and then you start writing this book, You're Hired.
Yeah.
What's sort of driving you there? Because a lot of I should probably ask the same question myself, actually, but a lot of the driver for me to kind of work in this area around personal development, helping people, the next generation, managing and leading people, has been driven by my discomfort when somebody fails or when somebody potentially is fired, or I have to do that because they've underperformed, but I think they're good. And then wanting to try and find ways of supporting people. But you're 4 years independent. What was sort of driving your motivation at giving back in some ways?
So I think the seeds were probably sown when I was at the English Institute of Sport. So I had, as part of the fast track practitioner program run by UK Sport, I had an intern, and he was a bright, and he's gone on to have a very successful career in high performance sport. But at the time, he graduated, and we had 12 months to get him to become an autonomous practitioner. And yes, he had the grades and he had the science, but there was no way I was going to let him loose with an Olympic level athlete. And going through that 12-month process with him and putting the scaffolding around him initially, and just watch what we do, be in the meetings, then taking the scaffolding off and letting him have an element that he delivers whilst being supervised, and then stepping away and letting him have a go on his own until get to that last sort of 2-3 months where he's an autonomous practitioner delivering himself. I think that's where the seed was sown. And then as an independent, I just kept getting emails off of people. What books should I read? What courses should I go on? Can you have a look at my CV? Can you have a look at my covering letter? I keep applying for jobs but don't get them. And I was sat in my home office. It was probably about midnight, answering the umpteenth email. Hi, thanks for emailing me. I've had a look at your CV. This is what you should. And I thought, there's got to be a more time efficient way than sending the same email 20, 30 times. And I struck upon this idea, again, probably because I've been reading some self-development books. I think probably the one that influenced me the most was by Michael Heppel, called How to Be Brilliant. And he has some really useful professional development tools in there. And I thought, I'll write a book. I'm going to write a book. That's what I'll do. Because it was near Christmas. It was near New Year. So, I'm going to do good things next year. And it kind of stagnated for about a year. It was an idea on a piece of paper. I then did a one-day workshop, which was really well received. And I had the transcript from that written up into a book form, and I was just, right, I'm going to do it. And again, it sat for about a year, almost in like a 90% finished manuscript. And again, I was working with a business advisor, and he set me a deadline. He said, right, here's the deal. You either get that book published within 3 months, or you can't do it for another 2 years. Let's see how important it is to you. And we got the book published and self-published it. And it was because I knew I'd probably taken a non-traditional route to where I was, and I thought there was definitely some help I could give to people. And I was seeing, when I worked at the institute and outside of that, I was seeing CVs and sitting on interview panels and thinking, my God, you've not even done the basic preparation to come to this interview. Your CV is full of mistakes. You know, you've not sold yourself. And I just thought it's not getting looked at in the higher education, further education establishments. People are being told, you know, you just would see CVs that were Times Roman numeral font, double spaced, that were really good to get you into university. They're never going to get you through the door at a high performance facility. People turn up not even knowing anything about the organisation or the people within that organisation where they wanted to work. So I thought it was just, no one was planning their career. Everyone was just hoping it would happen. I said to you, I saw a really good program with Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld was talking about comedians, the current crop of comedians, and how they're super talented, but they kind of sit in their room going, I'm super talented, I'm an amazing comedian, I'm going to be discovered. And one day the Comedians Bureau is going to turn up with black suits and sunglasses and say, Steve Ingham, you're a really talented, amazing comedian. We want you to come with us for this perfect job. And it was almost like the graduates, I've got my degree, I've done a bit of hands-on. If I sit here and wait, I'm going to get called to work at the IS. People are going to turn up from the sports science high performance agency and say, we've discovered you, come with us, pack your bag, you're going to go to Tokyo and work with an Olympian.
We've read your second year undergraduate environmental studies dissertation.
We've heard you're amazing and we have the role for you. And it's almost like people felt that, well, in 5 years I'll be at Manchester City. And I'm like, what are the stepping stones? What's the process that you're going to do? So much in the same way when you write an annual training program for an athlete, it was kind of taking that concept and saying, okay, well, let's plan out your month, the next 3 months. What are the steps that you've got to take on a weekly basis to get you there? Where are let's do a gap analysis. Where's the gaps in your skill set? So for someone like me, networking, I still find it difficult now, but going to a conference, I just used to sit at the back, not talk to anybody. So I knew that was a real gap in my skill set. So I had to find ways of putting myself out there at those sorts of events. So yeah, I just saw what was coming through the system and thought, they're not prepared. They, as I say in the book, they go into a gunfight, with a knife. They are not prepared because there's people out there that are packing all sorts of machine guns and shotguns, and when it comes down to it, the job interview, they're going to take you down. You got no chance.
Yeah, I like the analogy, although I'm not sure many people have got machine guns. I'm not sure there's many people with vocational skill graduating from many universities nowadays. There are a couple that are doing some good work. It's a couple of universities that are doing good work, like Liverpool John Moores have got good placement schemes, for example.
Yeah.
But equally, the vocational skills gap has grown, it's worsened. That's what I've seen over the years.
I think you've got very smart people that can do lots of amazing things with spreadsheets and data. And I think going back to reflecting on my education, the Marathon des Sables, the Northwest Sports Science Support Project, actually, Dave Kellett standing me in front of a group of parents and me having to give a talk on plyometrics to mums and dads and 12-year-old kids. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Well, I did, but how to interact with different people was, on reflection, that was really invaluable.
But that's one type of opportunity, and like we've got this online course coming up, where actually my big statement is, no, exactly as you've said it, no one's going to knock on your door and ask you to come and work for them. You've got to get out there, or you've got to develop a reputation for yourself based on good work.
Yeah.
But equally, even if you do have those Dave Kellett moments where they say, "Go on, you can have an opportunity," I still think, a bit like the side hustle, that that's dwarfed in its effectiveness if you get out there and graft and create those opportunities for yourself. That's self-generated. Get off your ass and knock on doors yourself completely independently. That offers a whole different layer of development and mindset about you getting out there in the world and pitching yourself, as opposed to, oh, I've put my application in, they've given me the placement, I'll go and do that and shadow, and literally shadow, stand in the shadows.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely a skill set that people need to develop as a modern graduate now.
Yeah. And so what else needs to be communicated? I mean, you've got your Bible, your strength and conditioning Bible, but that is the specifics, isn't it? Are you still writing? Still got some plans? I mean, what else needs to be communicated, Nick?
I think increasingly it is this whole area, and I think certainly within strength and conditioning, the more you go to conferences, the more conversations now are around the coach, S&C, athlete interaction, and being able to speak each other's languages, and being a chameleon is key. You know, you're still essentially the same. You're still the S&C coach, but depending on the environment, you can adapt to that environment and change your language and the way you interact and the way you disseminate information. So, you know, working in action sports with a downhill mountain bike team, as you'll know, they're just a very different person and a different way of communicating with them, and you have to adapt the way you are. And I think that's probably where the EIS was really useful for me, because you had in any one day maybe 20 different sports coming through the door. So you've got to go from wheelchair basketball to track and field to women's rugby to equestrian, and you've got to adapt as you go. The language, the uniform, the way you give the information. I think that's difficult to get exposure to that.
Yeah, and it's certainly been brewing on my mind about that. Once you're in and you've got the job, because it's sort of the preparation bit for the graduates and the aspiring practitioners, trying to get how you put a CV together, how you perform an interview. As the theme for some of our webinars recently. But then when you actually get the job, and then suddenly you're just thinking, whoa, this is different. There's a whole load of other things I don't even know what they are, but I'm confused by them. That sense when you start your first day in a job and you come home, you've got a screaming headache, you're absolutely shattered, but all you've done is fill in an induction form in and meet a few people. That dynamic and the team working and developing trust and rapport and just finding out the norms, a lot of that goes unsaid.
Yeah.
But actually, you can quantify it, you can describe it, you can model it, you can talk about some of those dynamics, and that doesn't exist, I don't think, really.
I can absolutely talk to people about how to approach your first 3 weeks in an organisation, in a professional football club, with a downhill mountain bike team, and I know some of the strategies I put in place when the mountain bike guys interviewed me, because there was 3 of us in the mix, all very, very qualified to do the job, and I knew from doing some background it was about making a connection, a personal connection with one of the key riders, and you know that connection came during the drive to the interview when I remembered I'd been to see an urban downhill race about 10 years prior to that, and I thought, so I pulled over in the car because it was quite a unique event, and I thought, I wonder if they raced at that event. Quick Google search, sure enough, they raced at that event. So during the conversation and the presentations, I said, oh, actually, I think, you know, you was actually at an event that I went and watched as a spectator. What was that? What one was that? And it was such a unique, oh, that was your first race, wasn't it? And it was like, and all of a sudden there was a personal connection that, oh, he's not just a strength and conditioning coach, he's someone that's got an interest in downhill mountain biking and has had for 10 years, albeit on the periphery, but there was a connection. And I think all of a sudden the X's and O's kind of drift away, and it's about finding those connections early on. And the more I go into clubs and try and implant myself very quickly, it's not necessarily about showing my technical skills, although that does come into it. It's about, did you play for X? Oh, at that club I worked with so and so. Oh, did you? Yeah. And you can guarantee that they're then going to go away and quickly send a text. What's this guy like? Is he any good? Or, and I think that's the key, is making those personal connections before you start showing how smart you are technically.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great story. But that's, as you say, that's alongside choosing an appropriate font and checking for mistakes on your CV. That is forethought and intentionality and diligence in preparation, of thinking, if I get this gig, this could change my life. This could set a whole new acceleration to my career.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that. Love that. So, where are we? Let's have a look at my little list of questions.
Deep in thought there.
Yeah, I don't know what to ask you next. So, Nick, have you got a mantra? Have you got some principles and philosophies that you really adhere to and that define you live by?
They've probably come out in more recent years, and I'm probably less embarrassed about them.
Oh, go on then. This will be good.
No, it's quite boring. But so I am an unapologetic specialist generalist.
Likewise, love that.
And I think I was probably very embarrassed to say that for a long time, because especially in the very male orientated world of strength and conditioning, it was like, oh, you've got to be, big S, you've got to be big on the strength, and everyone's got to be doing power cleans and all these sorts of things, and you've got to have deep domain knowledge, and you've got to be the rugby guy or the football guy, and I'm like, well, in terms of career longevity, I'm going to be the whoever wants to pay the mortgage guy. So at last count, I think it's 36 different sports. The principles you apply go across all the sports, but I'm quite comfortable with being probably the specialist generalist, and the derogatory sort of term is jack of all trades, master of none. And I don't believe that. I think it's a real skill to be able to go from one day with a professional football team to the next with a downhill mountain bike racer, and the next day work with a golfer, and have an impact with all of those athletes. So I think having that depth of knowledge is really good.
But doesn't necessarily equip you to do your job in that sense. I kind of view it as a performance problem solving, where you are drawing from inspiration and creating connections between quite diverse fields, where you're drawing those together at that moment, that sort of crucible moment of making a decision about somebody's training that is so multifactorial that you could never apply scientific control to it anyway. But you're making a judgment in that moment based on weighing all of those moments, those decisions up.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting for me is when I go to a sport or a coach, and they're very nervous. I've had this just this last year, and the coach is kind of nervous, like, well, yeah, I know you've worked in this sport, but not as much, and you've done all these other weird sports. And then once you actually start working with them, they start seeing all the connections. And they know it's not your first rodeo, and it's like, yeah, I can short circuit this and make that decision because I've done this in 4 different sports in similar situations with athletes that are not dissimilar to yours. Just because they wore a different uniform or used a different implement for their sport, it was still the decision making process. So yeah, I'm unashamedly a specialist generalist. I think I'm super comfortable in my own skin now as well. So my early presentations, I tried to be Mr. Science. It's not me, and I was probably horrific. So I'm a lot more comfortable at kind of telling stories, and there is science backing up what I do, but I have weird analogies. Anyone that reads the Strength and Conditioning Bible knows that I have weird metaphors and analogies, and I think it was reading the work of Nick Grantham and people like that kind of gave you permission to tell stories. So yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable in my own skin. What else did I look at? The the hubris for humility is one, so just realise what role you actually do play in performance. And I do believe we play a significant role in improving performance potential, but equally we are quite a small cog in a very big wheel. So someone said backroom staff is called backroom staff for a reason, and I quite like that, because I think whilst we are on podcasts and stuff like that, I accept the what's going on with this but we are still backroom staff. It's still about athletes front and centre. So I quite like being in the background as much as possible, even though I do podcasts and stuff like that. Ask stupid questions. I've been quite happy being the annoying 3-year-old when I go into a new sport and asking why. Why do you do that? Why is that acceptable? And then with that, with all the sports I go to, so there was a real fashion for marginal gains. Now, I don't necessarily buy into the marginal gains philosophy for the majority of sports, because the majority of sports that I've worked with, and I can only say on my personal experience, marginal gains is not the important thing. What I've had to look for is the massive, glaring, obvious thing that's really easy to do, that no one's doing it, and if we just do that, that will change everything. And that, for me, for most sports, that's the key. There will be one or two sports like cycling where it is marginal gains, it is looking at the minutiae, but they're so far removed, and it's basically a point, go from A to B as quick as you can sport. You get into a sport with lots of moving parts and lots of individuals, so team sports, sometimes it's the big stuff that gets missed because we're so bothered about the minute detail of what sample we've just taken. And so that's it really.
Yeah, I love that. It almost felt like a bit of a process, actually, a philosophy of thinking I'm comfortable in what I know and what I don't know, or what is the essence of me, but also that a specialist generalist approach means that you can be versatile, agile, or draw on diverse fields.
Yeah.
Asking those stupid questions will hopefully get to the nub of the big thing, as opposed to going in and saying, I'm the whatever guy, I'm the rate of force development guy, or I'm the mental skills guy. And then that completely limits your impact, because they just think, well, that's the only thing I can go to for that person, as opposed to actually finding the nugget.
And I know working with the athletes, so I get there and I'm in to be their physical preparation coach, and all the strength and power development stuff is all good. That's all comfortable. And then we start getting into, okay, we need to do some on-bike conditioning. And I'm like, I've got a handle on energy systems. It's not, I don't know energy systems, but I could have kind of bluffed my way through that. But actually, the strength is in your network. Who did I gave you a call.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to go to energy systems and endure, I know someone that's going to be far better to come in and complement that aspect of what I'm doing. And again, that's something that I've always been comfortable with, is referring out to people and saying, actually, my scope of practice, I'm good at that, but I know someone that's awesome at it. So let's get the awesome person in to show us really what to do.
That's a long-term win as well, though, isn't it? I mean, it's really actually quite effective to drag somebody else down and say, well, you don't want to listen to them. It does work, and a Machiavellian approach, but not for very long. And then you get a bad name for your attitude and approach, and people will erode that trust without even realising it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's been a career highlight for you, Nick?
Oh, you didn't ask me that question in the preparation notes. That stumped me now.
Well, going off piece now. Wait, what's coming next?
Career highlights. Wow. I don't think it's necessarily when people have even won the major. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. Don't get me wrong, it's nice when people win stuff, but I think it's the moments of struggle and making the connections. And I know just going for. In my first season with the mountain bikers, I refer to them quite a lot because they've really shaped a lot of what I do in recent years. But going down for a training session and Rach just said, "Can we go for a ride on our bikes?" I was like, oh, okay. And we went for a ride for an hour and chatted and got loads of stuff sorted out. And that was the training session. And it was, so someone having the confidence and the trust in you to have that conversation that seemed like a throwaway conversation, but that's a bit of a highlight, for me. And I guess just knowing I've been a small part in people's achievements. I guess being very lucky to be at major championships and seeing people deliver. Also being there when it's not gone quite so well as well. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's lovely.
It's a very rambling answer, but
no, that's a nice one in the sense that someone demonstrating kind of unquestionable trust in you. That feeling that you had. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, definitely. I think I can think of one of the women's basketball players who ultimately didn't make the cut for London 2012, but we kind of almost went a little bit rogue with her training outside of the governing body to give her that one last chance to get called into camp and give it everything she could. And she kind of sat slightly outside of the system, and I supported her in my own time, and she got called up, and ultimately she didn't make it. But it was like, you kind of gave us the shot at trying it, so that at least now I know I tried the best I could and wasn't quite good enough. Otherwise, it could have been very easy just to let her sort of drift and always be questioning whether she would have made it or not. So I think things like that are as important, if not more important, than when you stood there going, yeah, we won the gold sort of thing. Yeah. Probably the human stories and the interactions sounds very schmaltzy, but I think it's true, definitely.
No, that's it. You don't necessarily remember what people said. You remember how they made you feel. In that sense, the actual cut and thrust, the emotions, don't you?
Yeah.
One pet peeve about the industry you work in, and if almost as if like you could wave a magic wand and remove it. So
I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, and it's really starting to put me off social media. It's increasingly a platform for people to moan about their lot or salaries or opportunities, and I've got no problem with someone moaning, but offer some solutions. Come up with a strategy, sit on a board and try and change and influence. Don't just sit there and go, oh God, I can't believe there's another job advert for £20,000 a year. It's disgraceful. Da, 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 da.
What is it about salaries at the moment?
Everyone's obsessed with it. Interestingly, this was raging a while ago, and I went back and put in my salary and did
I've done the same
to look at it, inflation, and my salary now would be £16,500.
So yeah, mine would be about the same. I think I started on 10.5 grand, which would be about 15 grand.
Yeah, so I'm like, and I'm not saying that what some of the current pay scales are right and correct, but it's what I learned in GCSE economics was supply and demand. Supply is massively outstripping demand, so guess what? That will potentially drive down the price.
But equally, it's beholden upon us as a profession to demonstrate the worth. Yeah. So if you're only ever worth 15 grand, that's what you'll get paid. If you are worth and valued more, and you bring more return on investment for your, and then they'll feel the threat of you leaving, or someone else will come and snap you up. Yeah,
absolutely. So I just think at the moment, if I could stop one thing, and it's not just about salaries, I just think you can get a lot of negatrons on social media that will just look and wait. They're almost like lurking and waiting to bash someone, either an organisation for what they perceive to be an unfair salary or opportunity, or an individual who's doing something slightly differently in the way that they're putting out information, and you're dumbing down. And again, Strength and Conditioning Bible is written for end user. It is not highbrow, deep science, but I guarantee that little voice in my head was my peer group are going to absolutely batter me for referring to periodization as Russian dolls and dominoes. But it's not dumbing it down, it's making it accessible for someone that hasn't got a degree or postgraduate degree. So I think just don't, if you haven't got something nice to say, fucking jog on. You know, just like I haven't got time for it on my timeline. Just offer some solutions and do something.
Did you do the
Or
purge on Twitter? You were going to do you were threatening a purge.
yeah, I was.
weren't you?
I was because I was just so over it. I'm like, seriously, you're just clogging up my timeline with negativity. So, like we know where we're at and why we're here. Let's try and do something about it. And jokes aside, I think like what you're trying to do is commendable. I'm sure you're going to get battered by certain sectors because he's charging for information. Same for me with stuff that I've done. It's like, well, you offer something different then. Be the person at university that puts on a module that does this.
Yeah.
It's like
I'm trying to fill a gap with this online course because it's not been provided, and it never has been, despite the messages. So try and provide a solution.
Last year, I got into one of these sorts of. I try not to, and I got into a bit of a to and fro with someone from academia because I was saying people aren't prepared. I've seen graduates that have come and have come out of university and they haven't been fit for purpose. They haven't been able to come into the job and be autonomous straight away. So it requires a lot of time and effort, and they have to be an intern because they've not got what it takes, and they got very upset about that. And well, okay, put a module on that does it.
It's a naive take. You know, this is industry informed perspectives because the end point of this is performance director, a head coach, head of science and medicine saying that person that you've sent over to me or that you said was good enough is not good enough. Yeah. That's what I've been on the receiving end that's informed and driven by this. And talking to a number of other industries, particularly in engineering, they are taking a completely different approach now, and that they're cutting out the graduate. So they're not employing graduate engineers. They're employing people at 18 as apprentices. It's been motivated by the government. And then they're studying part-time so that in 4 years' time that they will be a graduate engineer. But that 2-year period of time that we would call an intern, postgraduate, they've got their certificates, they've got the job, and then now we have to spend probably a couple of years training them up. They're putting that at 18 and 19 and 20, perhaps when they're more open-minded. And that as a threat to the very essence of graduate education is very real, I think. And to turn a blind eye to it is naive.
Yeah. So, absolutely. But so going back to your thing that I could get rid of, like if you're going to be on my social media feed, make me laugh or inform me of something interesting.
All right.
Or show me some chocolate cake or ice cream. Those three criteria. If you're just going to moan, you can do one.
Chocolate, ice cream, make you laugh, or something interesting. All right, we've got that. Well, listen, Nick, it's been brilliant to catch up with you. And I know that we're really aligned. And I'm also conscious sometimes that I invite people on that I like to have a good chat with, which I guess is a good part of my CPD now. Is I don't get a CPD budget. And connecting with people, as we've talked about, using the podcast as a vehicle to have a chat is brilliant. Yeah, I think it's if the one thing the podcast has given me is that, and it's great to spark off you and share ideas. But also, whilst we're still aligned, I feel like actually you've challenged a few of my views today and added to them and moved them on, and that's been brilliant to catch up.
That's good.
We should get the Applied Sports Science Development Group back together for one last
shebang. Where are they all now? It'd be interesting.
Maybe we try and write the next book together. Maybe we could try and have a little hatch on that. What do you think?
That'd be a good idea. That'd be a good book.
That'd be a good book. I was having a rant. Transcribe this rant. There you go.
No, but we'll offer solutions at the end of it. You can't just rant. You've got to offer solutions.
Yeah, actually, we have had a few moans, but we've offered some solutions throughout the chat. So it's been brilliant.
Yeah.
Nick, thank you so much. Loved it.
Steve, thank you very much for having me on. Absolute pleasure.